Let's take a look at some labour trends we may be seeing into 2025. We're joined by Brendon Bernard, senior economist at the recruitment firm Indeed. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
What you are seeing signs of weakness in the labour market, for example, job postings down.
For sure. They're down about 9% year over year as of December. And this is a continuing trend that we've seen since mid-2022. The labour market emerged from the pandemic in a really strong state. It was a real job seekers market. All those trends have reversed over the past 2 years, and they've resulted in just a weakening situation overall. And we can see it in the unemployment rate as well, which in November hit 6.8%.
And you think that it could well head towards 7.5%?
Well, we need something to change for these job numbers to turn around.
Right.
Employer demand needs to rebound. That's a key factor. And to generate that employer demand, the overall economic situation has to do better. Now, there's a bit of optimism going into 2025 around, I'd say, the waning impacts of the Bank of Canada's rate hike cycle and now the bank's cutting. And so perhaps there are fewer headwinds from the economy from tighter monetary policy. So that could help support GDP growth, help support employer hiring appetite. But we still need something to change in the meantime to avoid those kind of negative trends. And in the meantime, we also have this just new uncertainty around the U.S.-Canada trade war that is not going to help things in the near term.
The federal government cracking down on immigration, although I've seen some skepticism expressed that they can really cut down the number of people coming in. They've got so many programs, various ways people can come and work in Canada. But do you think that will have a decisive effect?
Well, there's two ways of looking at immigration trends that are both going to be important in 2025. There's the inflows, and then there are the outflows. Mm-hmm. And I think on the inflows, that's actually easier for the federal government to control. They've already announced reductions in the number of non-permanent residents who will be in Canada. And we're actually seeing that show up in foreign job seeker interest. So for instance, on Indeed, we track clicks from job seekers on Canadian job postings coming from abroad. And what we saw was a huge surge in foreign interest from 2021 to 2023, at the same time that the overall international migration to Canada soared. Since mid-2023, though, there's been a near full reversal in that surge in foreign interest. And so it does suggest foreign job seekers are less likely to be looking for roles in Canada. I think the number of foreign students in Canada is also going to come down. And so on the inflow side, there probably is going to be a substantial slowdown. And we're probably actually starting to see the first signs of it. SATCAN released some population data earlier this week. The wild card, though, is on outflows. There are a lot of people with expiring work and study visas, and we don't exactly know their numbers, how many people are going to leave, and what the labor market impacts of those outflows are going to be.
Now, of course, you see reports of people who wanted to move here permanently but are disappointed they can't get decent work.
Yeah, and it's kind of what happens when you have major changes in either direction in immigration policy. We had signals of sort of like opening up immigration policy, or kind of in the rebound from the pandemic, non-permanent migration, whether foreign students or other temporary foreign workers, they soared. The number of permanent residency slots that the government sets every year rose a bit, but not enough to match that soaring number. Now those PR slots have actually been reduced for the year ahead. And so there's a huge mismatch between the non-permanent side of immigration and the PR side of immigration. And just the result of that and the kind of a rapid change in government policy was always going to kind of create a pretty chaotic situation.
I know this involves value judgments and it's a very broad question, but have Canadian employers abused the temporary worker program? Have they used it excessively as a source of cheap labor?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know if abuse is the word that I would use, but I think in general we got a little short-sighted coming out of the pandemic, where it was quite a tight labor market, and there was a sense at that time that sort of was promoted that this is the future. We've got an aging population. Canadians don't want to work in certain types of jobs anymore. And so we have to ramp up the number of people coming to Canada because we're going to have labor shortages for as far as the eye can see. And what it turned out happening was that the rebound from the pandemic was actually a really strong cyclical environment combined with sort of the strange trends that happened just in response to the public health crisis and then the reopening of the economy. And so we had a temporary challenge in certain sectors around hiring that wasn't actually a signal for the future. And I think people got a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of migration needs to fill all of our labor market gaps for the foreseeable future because these trends are looking long-lasting and permanent when in fact they were pretty cyclical.
When you look at, say, a fast food chain bringing in temporary workers, I mean, is that right for the country? Should these fast food chains just pay more money? And if they have to put up their prices, that's capitalism.
Well, I think that's definitely where the thinking has shifted since. Now, there are going to be in some cases, especially in rural areas where the labor market is still actually relatively tight, where there is more of a trade-off between just the number of, where the supply of labor is a factor determining just the number of active businesses in those locations. And so it's not necessarily just a kind of like a zero-sum game that temporary foreign workers are just going to keep wages low and in jobs that otherwise would be filled by Canadians here. There are kind of like broader questions about the business environment, especially in areas where population has been declining over the long term. Think, though, in the larger cities, we see, for instance, Toronto's labor market is quite weak right now, that there has been a bit of displacement among, especially Canadian youth, from the surge in newcomers abroad. We've seen, for instance, in the LFS, the number of Canadian youth who've never had a job.
The labor force survey.
Sorry. The number of Canadian youth who've never had a job spiked to 25% this past November, when over the prior decade it was about 21%. So a 4 percentage point jump in just 2 years. That hasn't been helped by a surge in temporary migration. And so I definitely think there were costs to the program that we see in the weak job numbers, particularly in youth.
Yeah, I guess if a kid doesn't get a job early in the career, that's bad for their life.
Yeah, it slows the progression down, and it's and now it's not necessarily permanent. Youth unemployment is quite cyclical, so these things can bounce back. But it's a rough start, and the longer the weak labor market situation lasts, the more likely the kind of like impacts are going to build up because there's a traffic jam in the labor market. There are more and more people who never got that first experience, and it makes it tough to rise the job ladder.
Thanks very much, Brendon. Brendon Bernard, senior economist in